You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm joined by Kate Riga. She covers our friends at the Supreme Court for Talking Points Memo, where she also co-hosts the podcast that many of you have seen with Josh Marshall. She is really on top of this miserable moment, and I wanted to check in. Kate, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I guess relevant to the moment we're in, can I just start with this? Why did you become a reporter, and why did you decide to focus on the Supreme Court?
Well, initially, when I moved to DC, it was to cover Congress, and this was March 2020. So a very cool time to be around our very geriatric congressional leadership. But Congress has just become so paralyzed, in this hyper partisan era that, for the first 2 years of the Biden administration, it was really exciting because, there was the trifecta and there was the possibility of legislation.
Yes.
But soon after that, it became so inert. And, for better or for worse, clearly here for worse, the Supreme Court has been very active, so it felt like kind of a more productive use of my time to focus there.
Do you think that paralysis in Congress is the partisanship only, or do you think Citizens United has contributed by taking Republicans out of legislating?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely both. And then you have the institutional blocks, the Senate filibuster most primarily, that, some of us had hoped that in 2021 would be its ultimate demise. But of course, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema saw to it that didn't happen.
Yeah. And saw to it that, well, you know what, I'm not even sure, had we passed the John Lewis bill, had we passed all these voting reforms, that this Supreme Court wouldn't have just brushed them away as they did the bipartisan McCain-Feingold bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, as we're thinking about kind of a hypothetical 28 Democratic trifecta, which really seems like the first opportunity to at all address the Calais decision, you're completely right. I mean, John Roberts will be immediately struck down, right? That was just an attempt to restore the VRA to its former glory. And then even something like the For the People Act, which would, do things more like enact nationwide gerrymandering reform and mandate these independent commissions. It's so hard to see any world where this Supreme Court would even allow something so neutral to pass, right? Knowing that it just would run completely counter to their partisan interests.
Yeah, I know it's quoted a lot, and for a long time it was quoted by the right in America, but I still think there's wisdom in Madison's Federalist 78, which was about the judiciary. And he wrote that liberty can have nothing to fear from the judiciary alone, but would have everything to fear from its union with the other departments. And here we are seeing that, where the judiciary has decided not to be disengaged from politics, and not to think about the facts and the law and the Constitution, but rather to use the power of the judiciary to strengthen a political faction. It's enormously dangerous to freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when you think about the kind of prior vision of the three branches, where the judicial branch is, comparatively the weakest, right? Because the legislature is the people's branch, and the executive, there's always been concern from the beginning about, an unbounded, super powerful executive. And now, especially in this new decision, you have a court that completely contradicted congressional intent and also tossed away, all the work of the lower courts. There are just absolutely no checks on this body right now, and they're acting accordingly.
Yeah, let's go through some of the history, because I feel like, I'm a lot older than you. I'm in my late 60s. So the work of my lifetime has been like I was a boy when much of the civil rights fight went on. And that feels like we are now from a legal perspective, the law in America, at least as it relates to political power, is where it was before the civil rights era. And that is so disheartening. So let's just talk about it, because he didn't do this right away, and we should name them for people. We had Citizens United, which said corporations should be able to give whatever they want. Right? People can't. People are limited in the campaigns. Right? They had Shelby versus Holder. Can you remind people what that one was?
So this is a 2013 decision that, for all intents and purposes, nullified Section 5 of the VRA, which was one of its most effective pieces because it forced jurisdictions, particularly in the South, that had histories of racial discrimination in its voting practices, to get any changes in voting laws cleared with the federal government first. And, this was very purposeful at the time because, fighting voter restrictions in these areas, people just likened it to fighting a hydra, right? You would address one and they would immediately pop up with something else. So this was a very kind of post-Bloody Sunday effort to address that constantly mutating attack on voting rights. And in Shelby versus Holder, the court said, the formula we use to determine which of those jurisdictions need pre-clearance, no good, but no worries, because Congress can just go back and write a new formula, knowing that Congress, by 2013 was not in a place where, there was a big enough kind of democratic control to pass a new formula and that could actually help this part of the law be enforced.
And we now know if they had, he'd have struck it down.
Exactly.
And then in 2019, we had Rucho. that one, as I remember, was when he said, "I'm sorry, folks, the doors are closed. You cannot come to the federal courts on a gerrymandering case."
Which is almost comical now, because the reasoning there being, federal courts are just not competent enough to deal with partisan gerrymandering claims, from the same body that claims complete, expertise in everything from, kind of micromanaging the technical regulations of agencies and everything else, right? Like, they have no problem kind of appointing themselves masters of everything else that comes before them.
And it's a gerrymandering case they just took.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then Brnovich was the one that said, "Oh yeah, you can have racial gerrymandering as long as you pretend it's political gerrymandering."
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And now they just got, in this case, just got rid of. Okay. So much for voting rights in America. They also, I mean, I don't understand. In Trump versus Anderson, they wrote new language in about this was the Colorado case about 14th Amendment. When Colorado had a trial and said, "Oh no, we're looking at the evidence. Trump is an insurrectionist, and so he's not allowed to hold office." And the Supreme Court, now this was not just the 6 Republicans.
Yep.
They said it's too complicated. We're in a mess if that happens, which I think is all of them, the Democratic appointed ones as well as the Republicans, saying that it's their job to fix the Constitution rather than to follow it. Shame on them, all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, especially in the particular VRA vein, we got Allen v. Milligan 3 years ago, which was just like this
Right.
Louisiana case, another garden variety, racial discrimination and redistricting case out of Alabama, where the majority, led by Roberts, said, this is likely racial discrimination. Sorry, Alabama, you have to draw another majority minority district. That was 3 years ago. And
Right.
now Alito's pretending, oh, we're not overturning that with this decision. Yes, you are.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Is it possible that there will be no Black representatives coming out of the South?
Oh, completely. Yeah. I mean, and the only thing I think that would keep that from happening is if, your Tennessees, your Mississippis, your states that currently only have one Democratic/Black representative just do the math and are too worried about imperiling other Republicans because they've already, squashed all of those Black and Democratic voters into one district. So it would not be for like any interest in kind of preserving the voting rights of that part of their populations.
It's just so disgusting. Yeah, let's talk about corporate power for a minute. Did you see those um, leaked emails that the New York Times ran on the origin of the shadow docket?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to just take a minute and talk to people about that? Because like Roberts and Alito, they wanted to stop. They wanted to stop Obama from regulating the oil and gas industry. Right?
Right. And it stemmed from, I think and these are just kind of like internal memos that the justices use to communicate with each other. Someone
Mhm.
leaked them to the New York Times. These are a bit old, years old, and they just kind of
Yep.
published them in full to say, here, look, make of this what you will. And Roberts's piece was so interesting because he's saying he wants to basically let the attorneys jump from a stay handed down in the district court. He wants to leap over the appellate court in between, take it right up to the Supreme Court, so they can kind of, get involved faster than they're supposed to be, because in the past, I think it was a rule about limiting mercury in water or something, but it had moved so slowly through the courts that the industry that it regulated had just decided, you know what, we're just going to comply with this regulation rather than kind of waiting for it to fight through the court system. And, Roberts is, God forbid, that happens again with coal pollution. So we
Right.
have to get involved really fast so that doesn't happen again. And even in the kind of buttoned up, restrained language of the justices, you have Kagan being like, that's not how it works. That's not the standard. We're supposed to be the court of last review. You have to let these things kind of move up the chain. But Roberts, and of course backed by Alito, and their direct interest in, the industry pressure here, are like, no, we have to, go in the wrong order, get involved faster, and make sure that our buddies don't have to comply with this environmental regulation.
It's so telling because Alito's note said, if we don't do this, the very legitimacy of the court is in question, right? And so let's see, if you don't follow the normal procedures, if you don't let the lower courts do their job, right? If you don't wait for the percolation they've talked about to get to the court, somehow that makes you illegitimate, unless what he really means is we are legitimate if what we're doing is defending corporate interests against democracy. And that seems to
Exactly.
be what he thinks the legitimacy of the court is.
Exactly. And you can even see that in their discussion of harms, right? Like the irreparable harm they are concerned about is the monetary harm to these industries and having to institute this regulation. There is no concern about the harm to, the human beings who will be, and the environmental effect of just letting, the pollution spew into the atmosphere. And that's how they always are. Whenever you can tell by who they give their sympathy to, where their loyalties lie, right? And that you see that over and over again. Like in Dobbs, right? That's Alito saying, women are not without electoral power, but the harm to state freedom is so immense. It's just they make it very clear kind of who they are concerned about protecting.
Right. And when you're supposed to balance equities, which is one of their jobs, if they've decided that some sides are more equal than others, you really can't count on them to balance anything.
Exactly, especially because, monetary harms to businesses are typically like one of the least important harms, because that is irreparable harm, right? Like they could be paid back, but harm to the environment, harm to people's health, how do you repair that?
So you and I are on a dangerous path here. Um, and it's this, and I've struggled a lot with this. We need a functioning Supreme Court in America. It's just the structure of our democracy requires it. And so when we go on these conversations, and I have them, where I say out loud, our Supreme Court is not a legitimate Supreme Court. We put the rule of law in jeopardy. And people look at me and they say, you can't do that. That's a terrible thing to do. And I want to say the weight of all of the evidence is that they've done it to themselves, and denying it is no way to fix this problem. And I just wonder how you think about that, because it's a terrible thing to say the Supreme Court of the United States is not legitimate and should, and that their rulings don't legitimately have the force of law. They do because they have power behind them, but they don't have democratic force.
Yeah, I mean, it's awful, but I think it's worse to pretend that what's happening isn't happening, right? To kind of give them an integrity that they don't deserve. And this has been coming up all the time, as I'm sure you're having conversations about too, but court reform, right? And how some people, good faith people are still balking at the idea of court expansion because of the concern that then you're in this race to the bottom and every administration that takes over will kind of contort the court to its needs. And I mean, I think that's a valid concern, but it's just, what is your option on the other side? That you have a Supreme Court for a generation, at least, maybe longer if Alito and Thomas retire at the end of this term, that is a comprehensive veto on every Democratic administration and will completely clear the field of any obstacle for Republican ones. I mean, that is just not a status quo that we can live under.
I wonder if there was a single moment that you just said, I've crossed this Rubicon. This court just has lost me and can't get it back. Was there one?
I think personally, by the time I was, in the industry, because Citizens United was before I was a professional journalist, but it had to be Dobbs. I mean, that was the first one that we knew it was coming. But still, you're refreshing the Supreme Court opinion page. You see the title, you see the A next to it. That means that Alito wrote it. And it was so, as harmful as it was, as much as it ensured that women were going to die, it was also just so sneering and so dismissive and such kind of a victory lap that we had just left the land of this kind of earlier iteration of the Roberts Court where there was this feeling that, well, Roberts really cares about institutional legitimacy, right? Like he's going to put some kind of restraint on the court's more radical elements. But by that point, with a decision like this that was sure to unleash political backlash and their just complete lack of concern about even tempering the language, that was just a moment where it was like, they are completely comfortable being openly partisan actors at this point.
Yeah, scholars have always said there were some legal issues with Roe, that it wasn't that, I mean, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought there were some legal problems with Roe. So while I hated the decision, I didn't lose confidence because of the decision, but the language that you're talking about it was really partisan. And then following quickly after that was Trump versus the United States.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
That's probably the worst one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, ending civil rights is pretty bad too.
That's true. There's hot competition for that title.
Yeah. So now they have temporary protective status in front of them. And tell everybody what that is, why it's important, and what is at stake.
So temporary protective status is this kind of special provision for refugees to the United States who are coming from countries that are just completely unstable, violent, dangerous, whether that be kind of natural disasters or civil war or, government violence. And so the Trump administration kind of came in and immediately ended TPS for roughly a dozen countries that had it. And the tricky thing about this case is that the attorneys for these cases are specifically about Haitian and Syrian TPS holders. You can't challenge the DHS's secretary's ultimate decision whether to terminate that status or extend it. That is not judicially reviewable. So they're left kind of fighting on this much smaller bore procedural grounds of, did then DHS Secretary Kristi Noem arrive at her decision to terminate the TPS status in the ways that the statute dictates? And what she has to do is so minor. All it requires you to do is examine the country conditions and consult with other officials. So in more well-meaning prior administrations, that would entail, DHS getting together with state and saying, give us an update. Is Haiti still as dangerous as it was when we first issued this status, and kind of going from there. But very similar to a lot of these agency firing cases we saw at the beginning of the administration under DOJ, even these kind of simple box checking exercises, the administration just refuses to do. They just kind of want to act with impunity and then would rather expend the time and expense to fight it all the way up to the Supreme Court and win there, rather than just do what this requires, which is really just, sending a few emails, basically. So that's the oral arguments they heard the same day that they handed down the VRA decision. And then the Haiti case has an extra dimension of an equal protection claim, because this administration has obviously said so many disgusting things about Haiti in particular, that they are also adding on an argument that, this was incentivized by a discriminatory viewpoint in the first place.
Well, okay, so the Solicitor General was asked, I think, if Donald Trump's comments were racist,
Yep.
right? And and I can't remember which of Donald Trump's racist comments he was asked about. There was one or two in particular. If you remember them, what were they?
At this point, I think it was poisoning the blood.
Right, are the Haitians poisoning American blood?
Yeah, JD Vance is eating the
Are
cats
they eating
and dogs.
cats and dogs? And is that racist? Yeah,
Right.
and Sauer was not able to have an opinion on that.
Right. Well, he said, no, I mean, look at the context, right? He's talking about the crime rate in these countries, prompting Justice Jackson to jump in and say, so is it the United States position that comments like that are only racially discriminatory if we have an actual racial epithet used in the comments, right? That's the only way we can know.
Yeah. And his answer was?
No, not racist. No worries.
They'll have racial epithets and they'll say they didn't mean it.
Exactly.
Okay. So any tea leaf reading on that one?
It seems almost certain that the Trump administration will win. All the conservatives were totally okay with this. And, if you come from the perspective of giving them a little more, quote unquote credit, the court has long deferred to the executive on matters of immigration, I think to a fault, and on this point, they were just carrying that same kind of like, oh, this is within the administration's purview. We don't really want to get involved. And then you had the additional point of, at one point, Justice Barrett was like, if we rule for you, the TPS holders, what does that really get you? And there is that layer to it, that even if the TPS holders pulled off the unlikely win here, now Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen would say, okay, fine, here is my correspondence with the State Department. We are ending TPS status, right? So this whole thing is just kind of a bid to get these poor people like a little more time,
Well, it's more than that, because even if it's a box that Mark Wayne Mullen has to check, that means that the president isn't just the king of everything.
Yeah,
he doesn't just get to say, I thought they should leave, so they left.
Right.
So I'm all for holding him to whatever shred of process is in his way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you see the piece? Again, the New York Times ran Thursday. It wasn't there. They reviewed body cam footage of ICE agents in Tennessee. It wasn't there. It wasn't there. They showed widespread racial profiling. They showed the impacts of Kavanaugh stops. And I just want to get your sense of how you can square it's okay to racially profile for all matters where the state is using force against you, but you cannot use it in college admissions where you might get a chance to, like how do you square that in the rule of law?
Yeah, I mean, you can't, right? It's just that totally lays bare the just hypocrisy, and similarly with this VRA case, right? You can't use race to ensure that minority voters are given electoral power. That is somehow a violation of the Reconstruction Amendments, right?
But you can use race to take it away from them.
Exactly.
Which is what they did in this case.
And you can subordinate the rights of minority voters to the partisan gerrymandering interests of red states, right? I mean, race kind of can only be used when it's being used to hurt minorities. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor kind of criticized publicly the Kavanaugh stops concurrence in a recent speech she gave at a college or something like that, and then came out with an apology and said I shouldn't talk about my colleague that way. And this came a day or so within Clarence Thomas going on this like public screed about the evils of progressivism, and I did not see any follow-up apology from that.
Nor will you.
Yeah.
Another case they took up was the one that says you mailed in your ballot 15 days before the election. And the Postal Service got it, stamped it, and then took 16 days to deliver it. And now maybe you don't get to vote. Why did they take that case?
Yeah, it's funny. This case is so, it almost feels like old fashioned kind of Republican voter restriction because now they're just swinging at such bigger pitches. But yeah, the grace period thing is something Republicans have hated for a long time and have tried to kind of fight in various ways. This is the first time it seems like the court will probably come down on their side, which, arguments that used to kind of work on a more conservative sensibility in the past included that this will hurt military voters profoundly, right? I mean, those people are mailing in ballots from all over the world. So, of course, they're going to need a little more of a flexible timeline to receive it. And then this has also been something of not a slam dunk for Republicans because another area of the country very dependent on mailed in ballots, rural areas, right? Heavily Republican rural areas. So this is all under that bucket of Trump hating mail-in voting and deciding it was the reason that he never really lost his elections, quote unquote. But, if he did, it's because of fraud and mail-in voting and that being a crusade, and how we've seen the Republican party's kind of incoherence in response to this. Occasionally they'll be like, you're right, Mr. Trump, mail-in voting sucks. And then they're like, well, this is hurting our voters too, so maybe we should reverse course on this.
My theory is that the court took the case. They shouldn't have taken the case. There's never been any fraud in this, right? And they know that. And it goes against their own conservative principles in so many ways. In an era when the president of the United States is trying to make people distrust elections, a court that cared about elections would not have taken a frivolous case that is based on the lie that somehow our elections are in jeopardy. So I think it was part of their effort to undermine, again, away the court just by taking a case can undermine our democracy. Shameful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can even see that in, I think it was the Secretary of State in Alaska, who obviously Alaska needs mail-in voting. Like this would really hurt, voters of all stripes there. And even at this point, someone like that who is in an election administration position in a state where you need to mail-in voting put out this very anodyne statement about how, we want to make sure everyone can vote, and we hope that the justices kind of take that into consideration. Like so cowed that a Republican official at this point cannot even say, this is bad for our state, including Republicans, right?
Yeah. All right. We only have a certain amount of time left, and I want to spend some of it on your fabulous piece, Inside the Parallel Universe, which you wrote. Nonpartisan Alito is under assault from the rabidly violent left.
Yes.
Talk about that, because that just,
Yeah. So I read Molly Hemingway's new book. She's the editor-in-chief at the Federalist, or editor-at-large, something like that. And she wrote this just hagiography of Alito, which was, when I first started it, I thought it was funny because Alito is famously curmudgeonly, right? So trying to dredge up these anecdotes where he seems human and likable, she's straining from moment one to kind of find examples of that.
You gave one in that piece, okay, he didn't just cut in front of everybody in the line, and that somehow makes him a human being.
Yeah, he didn't get a reservation at a restaurant and then he left. Can you believe it?
Right.
I have to, he is a fan of the Phillies, and you know that because she reminds you every 2 pages. That's really the humanizing element here.
Yeah, I was a Cubs fan. That doesn't help him much.
Exactly, yeah. But as I got further into the book, I mean, it was almost a hallucinatory understanding of the current moment, in particular with this specter of leftist violence that is always right about to strike and is fatal and is so dangerous. And I think the way that struck me most that this came up is when the Dobbs opinion famously leaked to Politico shortly before it was released. Huge deal, right? We had not really seen leaks of that caliber from the court before. And in her telling it is a straightforward example of open warfare on the conservatives, that the biggest concern was that they were going to be assassinated in order to deprive the court of the majority it needed to pass Dobbs, and that the liberal justices, by taking a while on the dissent, were collaborators with these, unnamed, unidentified kind of pro-choice assassins, and that they stretched out the time it would take in order to give those people more time to kill the justices. And this is based on, go ahead.
It's insane, right?
Yeah.
It's insane. But we now have to say they believe it. It's not anymore okay for us to say it's just insane. The sun is out today and they're saying it's nighttime. Of course they know better. They're just saying it to get under our skin. Now, everything we've seen from January 6th on says they will act on this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I live in a city where they sent their troops. I get it. They are going to act on this stuff. So when you got in there and you showed that they really are crazy in this sense, they're crazy what they think. And is it your sense that when and if they lose power and the other guys gain power, that they will have the new crop will have the courage to do something about this? Or will they say, oh, we just need to kiss and make up and come back together, which is what Joe Biden did. And then the whole country got our ass kicked because of it. So I'm wondering whether you think we'll make the same mistake twice.
I think it would be fatal if that happens. And I have long been concerned that we have not had a huge amount of evidence yet under kind of current Democratic congressional leadership in particular, that the lessons of the Biden era have been learned. But I will say the response to the redistricting arms race buoyed me a bit. In the past, I think the Democratic Party would have said, that sucks, but we're doing independent commissions because, we believe in democracy. And this was the first big example we saw of kind of gloves off. Fine, you do this, we are going to respond, right? And Hakeem Jeffries, I will say, in response to the Clay decision, said, okay, we're going to gerrymander the heck out of California, Illinois. We're getting Maryland back on the board. We're not going to take this lying down. So that was a good suggestion.
I think the last place you will see the courage required to do this is in Washington and amongst the leadership there. They're used to playing let's make a deal for the last 50 years, and it's worked for them. But out here in the rest of the country, oh, you are seeing it.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, and you're seeing it a lot too, I think, in some candidates who are running right now, right?
Everywhere, from dog catcher to Congress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, in Maine in particular, right, we just saw Janet Mills, a successful governor, bow out before the primary was even finished. And she was the kind of the handpicked Schumer candidate, had the establishment backing, and was getting just whooped in the polls, right? I mean, it does give you an indication that voters will not abide by the same kind of mold of old Democrat.
Yeah. And I want to say to everybody listening, we may not have a free and fair election, but they didn't have one in Hungary 10 days ago either. Show up in huge numbers and we'll be okay.
Yeah.
But, we have to show up in huge numbers because as the people you watch, those nice people in the Supreme Court, all bets are off on what they think.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. Listen, it was a great pleasure to talk to you today. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, I would love that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, wait. Tell them where they can find your work.
Yes. So I write at talkingpointsmemo.com, TPM for the cool kids. I co-host the Josh Marshall podcast. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky, Kate Riga. So yeah, find me there.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.